By the end of each year, I like to reflect on my accomplishments and see how far I've been in life. What did I learn? How many books did I read? Take a moment and think about your life. Think about your achievements, and when was the last time you did something out of the ordinary? This approach actually helps me to reflect on the upcoming year, to think, if last year I ran 5K, so this year I'm running 10. If last year I read 3 books, so this year I'll be reading 7. This approach actually helped me to climb the ladder gradually and get into the wild without expecting it. On May 2015, I was sitting behind my desk in my full-time job and thinking how draining this life has been. How little did I accomplish? I really liked working there. I loved the environment, the people. I was actually giving back to the community. But what about my personal growth? What about my adventurous side? It was one of those moments where I thought, it's time to do something different. It's time to think about that email, that job in Dubai that I've always wanted to be a part of, to work on the first animated movie in the Middle East, and to be surrounded by artists that I've always can learn from. And that was the moment where I thought I had my master's degree in animation and computer art. I struggled really hard to find my way through it. Then maybe it was the time to knock that door without thinking twice. I pitched that email, and I heard back from the partner. He gave me a very fair offer, and that was the least of my concern at the moment. I just wanted to be a part of this job, and I only had 2 days before flying to the US for my annual leave. We didn't talk logistics, and I wasn't sure, did I really get this job or not? The next morning, I was on the earliest flight to Dubai. I went to the studio, uninvited, and asked to see the partner in person. It was very strange for the assistant, and she asked me to have a seat, as he was not coming today because he was at the Arab Media Forum at Al Jumeirah. I was sitting on the chair, thinking anxiously. 12 hours ago, I was sitting behind my desk, and right now I'm in one of the biggest animation studios in Dubai, surrounded by professionals that in a field that I'm most passionate about. We had the weirdest phone call, and he asked me to come. When I first entered, I was in my casual shirt and backpack. I was so undressed to be in that forum, especially when you're passing by all the media elites. But it didn't matter to me. We had a talk. He offered me a job, and he said, remember his words very well. He said, I'll have your name in the credits. I'm surrounding you by professionals, and if you need any help, my assistant can help you. On my way back, I was thinking, what would have happened if I did not pitch that email? If I thought, nah, I'm not gonna get it. It's always about trying. It's always about sending that email. It's always about expecting a no, because sometimes it's a yes. Looking back at this, I thought, it's always easy to cling to what we know, to stay in what we call the comfort zone. A few months later, I came across a website. And this website was a call for all women to get on a very exhilarating expedition to the North Pole. And again, I had no idea what was I putting myself into. I applied, and I was selected among hundreds of applicants. I was the only participant to come from Kuwait, and I was the youngest one on the team. The Women Euro-Arabian North Pole Expedition is a group of 11 women who came together to foster dialogue and understanding between women from the Arab countries and from the European regions. I wanted to be a part of this expedition. I wanted to be a representative of my country. I wanted to be that voice that would inspire women to go beyond the expectations of others and to say, yes, we can do this. Of course, the expedition required a lot of prior training. The first training was in Iceland, and it was on the Long Glacier. We were literally dropped in the middle of a snowstorm. I was there trying to set up the tent with my tent mates, and the wind was really strong. I can still remember how the snow was getting into my eyes. We were trying really hard to pull it away while the wind was hitting. And I was trying to fix my gloves. I was trying to fix my jacket. And everything literally was falling apart. When I first entered the tent, my hair was soaked, my hands were freezing, and I'm pretty sure that my tent mates could tell this was the very first time I was put in such extreme cold conditions. It was bad. It was a slap in the face where I thought, what have I done? How am I supposed to stay here for another 5 days? And staying in a tent with another 3 tent mates is very overwhelming. You all have your little corner, and I must admit that I am a very little bomb that explodes in no time, where I get my stuff everywhere. Thank God, one of my tent mates had the same problem, so we both shared our corners, and we had more room. The training lasted for another 5 days, and each day I would look to myself and say, it's okay, tomorrow is going to be a better day. But it was always the same. Think about your gear. Your base gloves, your mittens, your scarf, your baklava, your goggles. You have to take care of all of that while you have your poles, while you have your hands on the poles and you're sticking in one line. It feels like the army, doesn't it? I had no idea what did I sign up for. By the end of day 5, I kept thinking, day and night, that this would be better. But it was never better. On the 5th day, I woke up. I was the first one to wake up in the tent. I packed my stuff and I was ready to go home. I just wanted to be in that bed with my socks and blanket and watch TV. The second training, however, was in Oman. And I was more familiar with the climate. I was working barefoot most of the time. I would sleep under the stars outside. And I was actually loving it. I didn't know or realize that I was a desert lady till I stayed in the desert for 10 days. And I was amazed to see that those who came from Europe, they suffered. At least the first couple of days. They couldn't handle the heat. They couldn't handle the feeling of sand in their feet. And I was amazed. And I thought that was part of the cultural experience that we've been on. After the 3rd training, I was happy, energetic, excited. I got all my gear set, and I was ready to become a polar explorer. The North Pole is located in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. It's a frozen Arctic Ocean, and it's covered by moving ice. In order to reach the pole, you have to fly from Svalbard, Longyearbyen in Norway, all the way to Barneo Ice Camp, which is a floating Russian station. And from there, a helicopter takes you 100 kilometers away from the pole. The climate in the North Pole is very humid, and it's very windy, and it's cold. It all started when we were dropped by the helicopter. That silence, where you get afterwards. 11 women in a minus 40 degrees Celsius, looking at one another and thinking, let's do this. I must admit that at least the first couple of hours, I thought, okay, this is happening, this is real. And I didn't have my gear properly set. And I started feeling really cold, and at some point, I wanted to warm up, so I started doing this. And I had my goggles on. And the funny thing that one of my tent mates, she came, Lemise, are you okay? And then another one said, leave her alone, she is praying. And I thought to myself, like, no, I'm not praying, but it was really hard to speak. Skiing 100 kilometers to the North Pole doesn't sound that bad, does it? Well, yeah, that's what I thought too. The moving ice gets to form different every day. On some days, we will get a very flat terrain where we get to ski all day effortlessly while pulling our sledges. On other days, however, we would have difficulty crossing the ice walls and the open water leads. And sometimes it's really hard to cross such a high ice wall. And that's when you get to take off your skis, leave your poles alone, carry your sledges all the way to the other side, and then you go back, you carry the skis and your poles, and you take them. And that's when you realize that you spent 3 hours just to cross 50 meters. We ski for an average of 10 to 12 hours per day, with 15-minute break every 90 minutes of continuous skiing. And at night, which is not really dark after all because it's a part of the year where it's 24-hour daylight, we treat ourselves with hot soup. That was my favorite part, before you get into a very fueling meal that is rich with carbs, protein, and fat. You would think that we would get into our sleeping bags afterwards, but unfortunately we would have a lot of drying to do. So we'd start drying our stuff while having the stove inside the tent. And this would take a couple of hours. And afterwards we start melting the ice and melting more snow, melting more snow so we can fill it in our flasks and water bottles and drop them inside the sleeping bag to keep us warm till the next morning. And surprisingly, this actually did work, especially when you are sleeping in the middle. If you're sleeping on the side, well, that's a different story. Those would be the nights where you wake up several times with the wind hitting the tent so hard, and you just wake up and you look at the person next to you and envy them. Of course, we had to be very careful while at the pole. The chance of seeing polar bears was very low. Unfortunately, we should still be careful, and we'd have 90-minute rotation the whole night. And trust me, waking up at 3 a.m. just to watch over 3 tents is what we call testing your patience. I'm not sure which was more exciting for me, the morning we realized that we are hitting the pole or stepping on the pole itself. And stepping on the pole is a glorious moment. Thank you. Looking at that GPS compass with 90 heading north is something I never thought that I would get to see in real life. Especially when sharing it with very courageous, determined woman. She turned 50 on the pole, by the way. We celebrated her 50th birthday, Ms. Bakhan. After stepping on the pole, which lasted for literally a few seconds before the current pushed us away from it, we spent the night there. And on the next morning, I was sitting in my tent, and I heard that loud sound. I rushed through the window, and I got to see the girls standing there cheering because the helicopter was there to pick us up. And in the air, I got to look at the distance, the water leads, and all what we've been through. And I got to think, despite all the hardship and the rough nights, I loved every bit of it. There is always this risk versus reward factor, where we always look at the risk and stop. But what happens if we push further? What happens if we say yes? What happens if we get cold and wet and so uncomfortable? It's that amazing feeling that you get afterwards and think, wow, I can't believe that I actually did this. I believe that each and every one of us can reach to amazing, rewarding places if we just took that extra mile and say, why not? Let me try something new. Thank you.